Welcome everyone to part 3 and the last part of this tutorial series where we're creating this magical mushroom scene. If you haven't seen part 1 and part 2, then you can check that out with the link in the description to the tutorial playlist. So in parts 1 and 2 we created the entire scene, and in this part we're going to be creating the magical orbs or embers that are floating around, and then we're going to be setting up some animation, rendering out the frames, and then adding them in Blender's video editor to get the finished animation. Real quick though, before we start, videos like these are made possible thanks to my Gumroad customers, my Patreon supporters, and my members on the YouTube memberships. So if you'd like to help support me and this channel, then I will have links in the description to my Gumroad store and my Patreon page and the YouTube memberships. And those are all great ways to help support the channel. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get access to tutorial files like this one here. You also get access to my procedural materials and artwork project files and 3D models and assets and other Blender content. And your support is very much appreciated. So let's get started with this part. So we're going to start off by creating those magical orbs or embers that are floating around. So I'm going to go back over here to the layout, and then I'm going to hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just so that we can preview the materials. So then what I'm going to do is press Shift A, and we're going to start by adding an object, which is going to be the glowing orb. So I'm going to go right here to mesh, and I'm going to go right down here and add an icosphere. And then right above me, if you click on the add icosphere settings, just open this up. I'm going to turn these subdivisions down to 1 because I want it to be very low poly, because we are going to have quite a bit of them. And we're going to use a particle system to have them floating around. So I'm actually going to hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view just so that it's less laggy. And you can see we have this giant cube here, and this cube is for the fog. So I'm going to select the fog object and then just press H to hide it, and we can unhide it later. So I'm now going to select the icosphere, and I can press G to grab, G to grab, and S to scale, and I'm going to bring this right down here and make it pretty small and just kind of stick it here underneath the ground. And then using the object context menu, I can click on shade smooth. So we now just have this nice smooth icosphere, and this is going to be the particle in the particle system. So now let's add a material to this. So I'm going to hop right over here to the shading tab. I'll press the period on the numpad, and that's going to zoom me over to the object. And then I can click on new here to create a new material, and I can just rename this material to glowing orb or ember or whatever you want to call it. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to make it glow. So let's take this emission value, and I'm going to make this to fully white. But then I want my glowing orb or ember to be kind of a yellowish color. So on this emission value right here, I'm going to bring this over and I'm going to make it a bright yellow. So something like that. And then I want it to look very yellow. So right here on the base color, let's use the same color. So I can actually just click and drag and drop this material onto the base color as well. And now you can see we have this nice bright glowing ember. And also I do want to make it a lot brighter. So on the emission strength, we can just turn this up, and I'm going to turn it up really high to a value of 8. So it's going to be pretty bright, but if you zoom away, it's going to be pretty small, so that will look pretty good. So I'm just going to turn the emission strength to a value of 8. So I'm going to hop back over to the layout now, and we need to create a plane that the glowing orbs can emit out of. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go right here to mesh, and we're going to add a plane. I'm going to press G to grab, and then I will hit Z to bring it up on the Z axis, and I'm going to bring this up, and then I can press S to scale, and I'll scale it up, and I'm just going to stick this plane right here kind of on the back a little bit. So bring it back a little bit and just stick it right here above the entire scene. I'll press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and just make sure the camera can't see it. So just bring it up a little bit just so that the camera can't see it. Something like that's pretty good. So now we want to add a particle system to this plane. So to add the particle system, we can click right here, and this is going to go to the particle properties, and let's just make this a bit bigger. And I'm going to click on the plus right here to make a new particle system. Now I want it to be set to emitter, and then to actually have it render the particles, I'm going to open up the render tab right here, and on the render as, I want to click on the halo, and I'm going to instead change it to object, so we can have it emit an object instead. So now what we can do is just navigate right down here and kind of zoom in, and then I can click on the eyedropper, and then we can just select that icosphere object. So now if you go up here and you kind of zoom in, you can see the icosphere objects are all around. Now they're way too small, so let's take this scale value. I'm going to hold down the shift key as I drag the scale value, and that's going to make them a little bit bigger, so I'll just make them a tiny bit bigger. And for the scale scale here, I'm going to turn the scale to like a 0.35. I think a 0.35 looks pretty good, but you can change that depending on the size of your scene. I think a 0.35 is pretty good. And then I also want to change the random scale, the scale randomness right here. So if we turn this up, then some objects are going to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to turn the scale randomness up to like a 0.6, and that way some of them are a little bit bigger, but then some other ones are a little bit smaller. So if you press the space bar, that is going to play the animation, and we can just watch that. So you can see that right now it kind of just looks like rain or snow, and that's not what we want. We do want them to slowly come down, but we want them to kind of be bouncing around and look like they are very light, kind of just bouncing around and floating around the scene. So we're going to play around with a few different settings here in the particle system. Now, one thing that I want to do is I want to change the number because this is way too many. So let's take the number value right here on the emission, and let's just turn this to like 100. 100 is much better. Now, to make these look more like embers, which are floating around, I want to change the speed of the animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right down here. Let me just close the render, and I'm going to open up the physics right here. So just open up the physics. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to open up the integration. Now, right here on the time step, we can change this, and if we make it smaller, then they're going to move slower. So I'm going to change this value to a 0.01, just a 0.01. So now if I play this, you can see they're moving much slower, and that looks a lot better. Now, if I hold down the Z button and go into the wireframe, you can see that they're ending like way up here, and I don't want them to end right up here. I want them to go all the way down. So to fix this, we're going to change the lifetime. So right up here on the emission tab, on the particle lifetime, I'm going to change this to like 500. Just change it to 500. So a 5 with 2 zeros, 500. And now if we play this, let's just drag this back here. Now you can see that the lifetime of the particles are much longer. And so because we've set that to 500, the particles don't end till like way down here. Now the particles are still falling down quite a lot, and I don't want them to just look like they're falling because right now it maybe just looks like some light snow. So let's actually turn off the gravity. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to open up the field weights. And then right here you can see there's gravity. So I'm going to turn this gravity value all the way to 0, and now it's not going to use any of the gravity. So now if I play this, you can see they're actually going up instead of down, and that's because they're like emitting out of this plane. So what I'm going to do is just select the plane and press R to rotate. I'm going to rotate it on the Y axis, so hit Y, and then I'm going to type in 180, so 180, and then enter. That way we're just flipping the plane around, and so now they're going to come down, and that is looking much better. So we can just play through that and see how they're moving, and you can see they're moving much slower. Now there is another problem, and that is that I want the animation to start at frame 1 and end at frame 250, and we are using the default of 24 frames per second, so this animation is going to be 10 seconds long. The problem with this is that if you go into the camera view, you're not really even able to see the particles until like halfway through the animation, and so at the starting frame, I already want there to be a lot of particles down here. So let's scroll up, and I'm going to go right up here, and I'm going to change this frame start. So it's starting right now at frame 1, but I want it to start earlier. I want it to start over here. So on the frame start, just click on this, and I'm going to change it to a -500. So -500. That way the simulation is going to start all the way over here at -500. So now if we play it, you can see that the particles are already way down here by the time we get to frame 1. So this is looking pretty cool, but they're not really moving around. They're just kind of moving straight down. And so I'm going to add a force field to make them moving around more randomly. So I'm going to press Shift A, and we're going to go right down here to the force field, and I want to add the turbulence. I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm just going to stick it right here kind of in the center of the scene. And then we can click right over here on the physics properties, and we can change the settings of the turbulence. So on the turbulence strength right here, I'm going to change this to a value of 2. And now that that is set to 2, if you go back here to play the animation, you can see that they're moving much more randomly around, and that looks a lot better. Now, if I select the plane again, and I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back into solid view, you can see that the particles are actually going through some of the objects. Like if you look right there, you can see that it just went through that object. And I don't want it to just go through the objects. I want them to actually bounce off of any large objects in the scene. So to make them bounce off of the other objects, we can just click on these big objects here. And then if you go right over here to the physics properties, we can add the collision to these objects. So just click on collision, click on this object, we're going to add a collision. We're going to do the same thing for this object, so add a collision, and right here as well, click on this and add a collision. And now the simulation will be a little bit slower because they all have a collision, but let me just zoom in here and show you. So if we look at this particle right here, you can see it just bounced off, so that is really cool. And so that's just going to make it look much more realistic. You can see that particle just bounced off of the mushroom. So that's going to make them much more random, and it's going to make some of them kind of flying up and some of them flying down, and they're just going to be moving around much more randomly. And then if you click back on the plane, I'm going to go right back here to the particle properties, and I'm going to scroll down, and we want to open up the viewport display. And on the viewport display, you can see there's a check mark that says show emitter. And so if we uncheck this, that way the plane is not actually going to be rendered. So if I check it, you can see it's going to show the plane, but I don't want the plane to like affect the lighting, or if the camera happens to see it, I don't want it to be able to see it. So let's just turn off the show emitter, and now we're not able to see that plane. So the plane is basically going to be completely transparent. All right, now this animation is going to be 250 frames, but what I want to do is I actually want to take the end frame and I want to turn that up to frame 251. And now what I want to do is I want to bake this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right up here and we're going to open up the cache right here. Now why I'm baking this is because sometimes if you don't bake it and it's rendering, sometimes if it's not baked, it'll just randomly reset the particles and the particles just go back up to the top, and we definitely don't want that to happen. And the other thing is that if we don't bake this and we just have it end at frame 250, at frame 250, when we actually render frame 250, all the particles are going to be reset, and so they're going to jump back up to the top, and so you won't be able to see them. So on the end frame here, I'm setting this to frame 251 because that is one frame after the end frame that I want. And then I'm going to click on this bake button right here. So just make sure you press Ctrl S again to save before you hit the bake button, just in case if it crashes or something. And you can see there's a loading bar, so hopefully it's not going to take too long. I will just skip to when this is done. All right, and we are almost done, and it is finished. So it's now baked the simulation, and so when we render it, that's going to ensure that the particles are actually going to be where they show. And then let's also hold down the Z button, go up into the rendered view. We haven't actually seen this in the rendered view, and that is looking super cool. And what I really like about this is that if you zoom into some of these, you can see because we have the depth of field turned on, some of them are a bit blurry, whereas other ones are a bit focused. So this one right here, this is like super blurry, but then this one is a bit more focused. So that is really cool, and it just gives a very nice atmospheric effect. So I'm now just going to take the end frame and I'm going to turn it back to frame 250 because I don't want to render frame 251. I was just turning it up to frame 251 to make sure it baked all of the frames that we were going to render. Because the previous time when I was practicing this tutorial before I filmed it, when I rendered this, frame 250 had the particles reset. So I'm just changing it to 251, baking the simulation, and then changing the end frame back to 250, just to ensure that that error doesn't happen. All right, so with that all done, the magical orbs are now finished. And I'm going to press Alt-H, and Alt-H is going to unhide that object that we hid so that we can see a little bit of that mist. So now we're going to be animating a few different values just to really bring this animation to life. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view, and then I'm going to select this object here, the fog object, and I'm going to go right over here to the shading tab, and then I will press the 0 on the numpad to zoom into the camera. And let's hold down the Z button and go back into solid. And actually I want to hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just because I find that that works a little bit better. And then just make sure you have that cube selected. So what I want to do is I actually want to animate the fog just a little bit. So we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on earlier in this tutorial, so I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key and then just select the color ramp to preview it, and you can see there is the fog. So I actually want to animate the location of the fog just a little. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a mapping node. Let's click on the mapping node, and I'm just going to drop it right in here between the texture coordinate and the noise texture. So now what I can do is I can actually animate this rotation Z value, and when I animate this, it's just going to kind of make the fog move around. So I'm going to animate this value. So to animate it, we need a timeline. So I'm going to move my mouse right up here when the crosshair appears, click and drag down, and that is going to split the window. And then I can also click click right here and drag over and then let go, and that is going to split that. So we now have another window right here, and then let's just click right here, and I'm going to change this to the timeline. And then right here, I'm going to type in a value. So I'm going to type in a value of 0, and that's going to hop our blue line right there to frame 0. So we are now on frame 0. So what I'm going to do is hover my mouse over this value, and I'm going to press the I key, and that is going to insert a keyframe right there. And also in the timeline, you can see the keyframes right there, those little yellow diamonds. So now right here, I'm going to click on this to change the time frame, and I'm going to change this to frame 251 just so that it's one frame past the end frame. And then right here on the Z value, I'm going to type in like a value of 7. And now that we've typed in that value of 7, I'm just going to hover my mouse over the value and press the I key, and that is going to insert another keyframe. So now I can just scrub through this, just click and drag right here where the numbers are, or just play it, and you can see that it's going to move. And it's kind of hard to see, it is kind of laggy. So what I'm going to do on my numpad is hit the /, and that is going to take me into the local view. And if I play this now, you can see that it's playing a bit faster. It's not quite as laggy, and you can see that it's moving very slow. So I'm actually going to go back to frame 251. So just move it over there to 251. And right here, I'm going to type in a value of like 10, and then just hover your mouse over the value and press I, and that is going to override that keyframe. So I can now hit the spacebar to play, and we can see that playing. Now you can see that it starts to speed up, and then at the end it starts to slow back down. And so I want this to be instead a linear animation so that the speed of the animation doesn't change. So press the A key with your mouse hovered over the timeline to make sure that is selected, and you might need to select the mapping node to see those keyframes. So I'm now going to press the T key, and the T key is going to bring the set keyframe interpolation settings up, and the default is Bezier, but I want to instead change this to linear. So now if I play through this, the fog is going to move at a very consistent speed. So I'm now going to hit the / on my numpad, and that's going to take me out of local view into the global view so I can see all the objects again. And then I'm going to Control Shift and select the principled volume again, and that is going to preview it, and that is using the feature from the Node Wrangler. All right, so the next thing that I want to animate is this texture right here. So if you just click on that texture, click on that little texture there of the leaves, I'm going to go right up here to the mapping, and I want to animate the same value. So I'm going to animate the rotation Z, and if I rotate that around, let me just zoom in here, just kind of zoom over to the mushroom. If I now animate the rotation Z, it's going to move that around, and it's just going to kind of make it look like the leaves are moving a little bit. So just move over to this object so I can see it, and then I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to type in frame 0 to go to frame 0, and then I'm just going to hover my mouse over this value on the mapping node, and I'm going to press I, and that is going to insert a keyframe. So then right here, I'm going to click on this, and again, I'm going to type in 251 for frame 251, so that is one frame after the end frame. And then I'm going to click right here on the Z value, and I'm going to change this to like a 6.5. A 6.5 I think is pretty good. And then hover your mouse over the value and press I, and that is going to insert a keyframe. And then just make sure you have the mapping node selected, and that way you can preview those keyframes there. So now if I play through this, you can see it kind of starts to speed up and then slow down. And actually, again, I'm going to hit the / on my numpad so I can just preview that. And that way it'll be a little bit faster because it won't have to render everything. But you can see it's still a bit slow, and that is because it speeds up and then slows down at the end. So what I'm going to do is just press the A key in the timeline, and that's going to select all of those keyframes. And then I'm going to press the T key again, and I'm going to click on linear again. All right, so now if I play through this, you can see it's moving at a consistent speed. Now it doesn't look like it's moving very fast, but if I click the / on my numpad, I can now zoom in here, and we don't want it to be going very fast. We just want it to be a very subtle movement, but you can see it actually really does move quite a bit because that is a shadow there, and so it does move quite a bit over the entire time of the animation. So that is good. I just want a speed like that. All right, so we are now going to animate the camera. So I'm going to press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera. Let's actually go back to the layout here, and then press the 0 on the numpad to go to the camera, and I can click right up here to select the camera. And then again, I'm going to click on this value right here. I'm going to type in 0 and then hit enter, and that way it's going to take us to frame 0. And then I'm going to hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, and also press Control S again to save your project. All right, so I now want to move the camera over, and then over the 250 frames, the camera camera is just going to move up a little bit and kind of rotate. So with the camera selected, I'm going to press G to grab, and then I'm also going to double tap the R key, and that is going to turn on the trackball rotation. And then I can hold down the shift key, and that is going to make my movements more sensitive. And I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to kind of bring it down to the side and rotate it over a little bit so it's kind of looking up and on the side of the mushroom. So just like that, and we can of course change this later if we need to, but I like something just like that. All right, now I want to insert keyframes here. So I'm going to press the I key, and then the I key is going to bring up the insert keyframe menu. And I want to click on the location, rotation, and scale. And that way now you can see a keyframe is right there. So then click right here to change the time, and I'm going to change this to 2:51. So again, it's just one frame after the end frame. And then I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm going to move this way up. And then I can double tap the R key and then hold down the shift key to make my movements more sensitive. I'm going to rotate this kind of down and then press G to grab, bring that up a little bit more, double tap the R key and just kind of rotate that over, maybe bring it down a little bit. Okay, so just put it wherever you want. And then again, in the 3D space, you can press I, and then we're going to insert location, rotation, and scale. And then I'll press Control S again to save. So now I can play through this and we can see how the animation is looking. Now it is really laggy, so what you could do is hold down the Z button, go into solid view and let go, and then you can just click right here and that is going to select the fog, and I can press H to hide it just so that we can't see it. All right, so that's a little bit better. It still is a bit laggy because this scene is really dense. There's a lot of things in this scene. So you can see again, it starts to speed up and then at the end it starts to slow down, and I just want it to be an even speed. So just make sure you have the camera selected by clicking right up here to select the camera, and then press the A key in the timeline to make sure you have those diamonds selected. Those are the keyframes. And then I'm going to press the T key again, and we are going to click on linear to make it a linear animation. So it just goes from the first keyframe to the second keyframe, and it doesn't speed up or slow down. It'll stay at the same speed. All right, so there we go. Now you can see it playing, and that does look really nice. So just press Control S again to save, and we are now ready to render these all to images on our computer. So I'm going to click right up here to go to the output properties, and then right here on the output, I'm going to click on the file icon to set an output. So I'm just going to locate to the folder with all my other files, and I just clicked on the plus here to create a new folder, and I just renamed the folder to rendered frames. I'm just going to click to go inside this folder, and then I can click on accept. So we're going to render these all out to frames, and then we will compile them with Blender's video editor. And then if you want to make the file size a little bit smaller, I'm going to click on the file format, and I'm going to change this to a JPEG just so that the file size is a bit smaller, but then I do want it to be full quality, so I'm going to change the quality right here all the way up to 100. All right, so I can just press Control S again to save. Just save the Blender file before you render, and then this will take a little while to render, so I'm just going to step away from the computer and then come back when it's finished. So to render out the animation, you can press Control F12, or you can also click on render and then click on render animation. And the render finished. So I'm just going to press Control S again to save the Blender file, and then let's click on file, and I'm going to go to new. Go to new right here, and I'm going to open up a video editing. And then right here in the video editor timeline, I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go here to image/sequence. And then just locate to the folder where you saved all the rendered frames. And I'm going to press the A key to select everything. Now, before I add them in, I want to click right here, and I want to click on reverse sorting. And that way it's going to play from the starting to the ending, because if you don't turn on the reverse sorting, then it's going to play backwards. So just turn on the reverse sorting so the .001 should be at the very top. And then click on add image strip. So now I can press the space bar to play, and we can check out the final animation. Now, the frame rate was set to 24 frames per second because that was the default, so I rendered it out at 24 frames per second, but we do need to change the resolution, so just set this to whatever resolution your video is. So I rendered mine out as 2560, so here on the Y, I'm going to type 2560, and then I actually want this to not be a square image. I want it to be a normal widescreen. So right here on the X resolution, I'm going to type in 4320, and then you can see that this is a bit smaller, and that's because we need to just scale it up to the correct size. So if you click on the strip and then open up the transform, you can see the scale is actually turned way down, so it's actually not its proper scale. So we're going to change the scale back to the default, which is 1. So click on the the X, change that to 1, and click on the Y and change that to 1. So now that is actually the correct scale, so we're going to get all those pixels in there. But of course, you can just change the resolution to whatever resolution you rendered out the images. And actually, if you want to have Blender do it for you, you can select the image strip, and then you can click right here on strip, and then you can click on set render size, and it should set the proper render size. And then if you need to, you can just change the scale X and Y here to 1 on this side panel right here. And then of course, if you want to, you could add like music or sound effects or things like that. I added in some music and sound effects for my final animation, but I'm just going to render this out now to a final video file. So I'm going to scroll down right here on the output, and then I'm going to click on this file icon to set an output. And then I'm going to just rename this as final video, and I will save this in the folder with my other files, and I'll just click on accept. So then right down here on the file format, I'm going to use the FFmpeg video, and then open up the encoding here, and I'm going to use the container of MPEG-4, and then you can go down here to the video, and I am going to use a video codec of H.264, and I will just set the output quality to medium and the encoding speed to good. And then if you have any audio, I like to use an audio codec of AAC. So once you've set that up, you can press Ctrl S and save this Blender file if you'd like to. Save your video editing file, and then to render this out, you can click on render and then click on render animation. And there we have it. So there is the finished rendered animation. So with that all finished, this is going to wrap it up for the tutorial series. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support me in this channel so I can continue to create Blender tutorials and Blender content, then checking out my Gumroad store and Patreon page and the YouTube memberships are great ways to help support me and this channel. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can also get the tutorial files for this tutorial as well as my other tutorials. So I will have the links in the description to the project files if you'd like to purchase them and help to support me and this channel. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial series, and thank you for watching.